Excerpts from Suzuki. For it was through Ekalite Shana Samukata Praja that supreme perfect knowledge was realized. It is the understanding of a higher order than that which is habitually exercised in acquiring relative knowledge. It is a faculty both intellectual and spiritual, through the operation of which the soul is able to break the fetters of intellection. The latter is always dualistic inasmuch as it is cognizant of subject and object, but in the prajna, which is exercised in unison with one thought viewing, there is no separation between knower and known. These are all viewed ikshana in one thought, kata, and enlightenment is the outcome of this. By thus specifying the operation of prajna, the Mahayanists have achieved an advance in making clear the nature of sambodhi. For when the mind reverses its usual course of working and, instead of dividing itself externally, goes back to its original inner abode of oneness, it begins to realize the state of one thought viewing, where ignorance ceases to scheme and the defilements do not obtain. Enlightenment, we can thus see, is an absolute state of mind in which no discrimination, parakapana or vikulpa, so-called, takes place, and it requires a great mental effort to realize this state of viewing all things in one thought. In fact, our logical as well as practical consciousness is too given up to analysis and ideation. That is to say, we cut up realities into elements in order to understand them, but when they are put together to make the original whole, its elements stand out too conspicuously defined, and we do not view the whole in one thought. His insight reached the bottom of his being and saw it really as it was, and the seeing was like the seeing of your own hand with your own eyes. There was no reflection, no inference, no judgment, no comparison, no moving either backward or forward, step by step. The thing was seen, and that was the end of it. There was nothing to talk about, nothing to argue or to explain. The seeing was something complete in itself. It did not lead to anything inside or outside, within or beyond, and it was this completeness, this finality, that was so entirely satisfying to the Buddha, who now knew that the chain was found, broken, and that he was a liberated man. The Buddha's experience of enlightenment, therefore, could not be understood by referring it to the intellect, which tantalizes but fails to fulfill and satisfy. For all we can say of it, the intellect is, after all, a spectator, even derived from passion or emotion. It's all intellect, so why separate it? Except for we need silence. For we need silence. I don't know the other word. It's handwriting. And when it does some work, it is as hireling, for better or worse. Alone, it cannot bring about the state of mind designated as enlightenment. The feeling of perfect freedom cannot issue from the consciousness of an intellectual superiority alone. If fundamental consciousness. In truth, as long as we confine ourselves to intellection, however deep, subtle, and sublime and enlightening, we fail to see into the gist of the matter. Thus, the Buddhists were obliged to assume some faculty dealing with things far above relative knowledge, things that do not appeal to our empirical ego. Ignorance prevails as long as the will remains cheated by its own offspring or its own image, consciousness in which the knower always stands distinguished from the known. The cheating, however, cannot last. The will wishes to be enlightened, to be free, to be by itself. Ignorance always presupposes the existence of something outside and unknown. This unknown outsider is generally termed ego or soul, which is in reality the will itself in the state of ignorance. These are different excerpts, I think. So that does he know, and he knows also other things far beyond, far better than those speculations. And having that knowledge, he is not puffed up, and thus untarnished he has, in his own heart, realized the way of escape from them, has understood as they really are the rising up and passing away of sensations, their sweet taste, their danger, how they cannot be relied on, and not grasping after any of those things men are eager for. He, the Tathagata, is quite set free. Buddhism is not there in mere learning. The highest truth is unfathomably deep, is not an object of talk or discussion, and even the canonical texts have no way to bring it within our reach. Let us once see into our own original nature, and we have the truth, even when we are quite illiterate, not knowing a word. As rainwater that has fallen on a mountain ridge runs down on all sides, thus does he who sees a difference between qualities run after them on all sides. The beginning of the sentence is cut off. It says, it just says, ... cuts off the hopelessly entangled logical mesh by merging all differences and likenesses into the absolute oneness of the knower, Junan, and the known, Junaya. The utter inutility of mental labors. All things are impermanent until you get an insight into your own nature. Do not say, I have perfect knowledge. Such is really committing a very grave crime. Nanda, one of the 10 great disciples of the Buddha, was known for his wide information, but did not have any insight into Buddhahood, because he was too bent on gaining information only. ... And after all, isn't life filled with wonders, mysteries, and unfathomabilities far beyond our discursive understanding? With all that the master can do, he is helpless to make the disciple take hold of the thing unless the latter is inwardly fully prepared for it. You have now found yourself. From the very beginning nothing has been kept away from you. It was yourself that closed an eye to the fact. In Zen there is nothing to explain, nothing to teach. that will add to your knowledge unless it grows out of yourself. No knowledge is really of value to you. A borrowed plumage never grows. In the age of void, there are no words whatever. As soon as the Buddha appears on earth, words come into existence, hence our clinging to signs. And thus, as we now so firmly take hold of words, we limit ourselves in various ways, while in the great way there are absolutely no such things as ignorance or holiness. Everything that has a name thereby limits itself. Therefore the old master of Changshi declared that it is neither mind nor Buddha nor a thing. It is conceived of by him by whom it is not conceived of. He by whom it is conceived of knows it not. It is not understood by those who understand it. It is understood by those who understand it not. At any rate, the masters speak figuratively of the opening of a third eye. Satori is the popular name given to this opening or awakening. How is this to be effected? By meditating on those utterances or actions that are directly poured out from the inner region, undimmed by the intellect or the imagination, and that are calculated successfully to exterminate all the turmoils arising from ignorance and confusion. As much as Buddhism is a living religion and not a historical mummy stuffed with dead and functionless materials, it must be able to absorb and assimilate all that is helpful to its growth. This is the most natural thing for any organism endowed with life. It was in the natural order of thought now for Buddhists to endeavor to find a philosophical explanation of enlightenment and nirvana in the theory of non-Atman or Sunyata, and this to the best of their intellectual power and in the light of their spiritual experiences. They finally found out Wabi really means poverty, or negatively, not to be in the fashionable society of the time. To be poor, that is, not to be dependent on things worldly, wealth, power, and reputation, and yet to feel inwardly the presence of something of the highest value. Despite the modern Western luxuries and comforts of life which have invaded us, there is still an ineradicable longing in us for the cult of Wabi, even in the intellectual life. Not richness of ideas, nor brilliancy, nor solemnity is sought, but just to stay quietly content with the mystical contemplation of nature and to feel at home with the world is more inspiring to us, at least for some of us. Of autumn. When days become shorter and nature begins to roll up once more its gorgeous displays of luxurious summer vegetation. Zen's habit of mind to break through all forms of human artificiality and take firm hold of what lies behind them has helped the Japanese not to forget the soil, but to be always friendly with nature and appreciate her unaffected simplicity. Sabi, loneliness or solitude. As I come out to this fishing village late in the autumn day, No flowers in bloom I see, nor any tinted maple leaves. The central perception of the truth of Zen, the one in the many and the many in the one, or better, the one remaining as one in the many individually and collectively. Zen has no taste for complexities that lie on the surface of life. Life itself is simple enough, but when it is surveyed by the analyzing intellect, it presents unparalleled intricacies. With all the apparatus of science, we have not yet fathomed the mysteries of life, but once in its current, we seem to be able to understand it, with its apparently endless pluralities and entanglements. This is a kind of condensation to common parlance. Pity that people without number try to play with the tide. They are all ultimately swallowed up into it and die. Let them suddenly awake and see that all the rivers run backward, swelling and surging. Poem by Secho. This is a longer one. It's a dialogue. Toki Mune is said to have once asked Buko, "The worst enemy of our life is cowardice, and how can I escape it?" Buko answered, "Cut off the source whence cowardice comes." Toki Mune, "Where does it come from?" Buko, "It comes from Toki Mune himself." Toki Mune, "Above all things, cowardice is what I hate most, and how can it come out of myself?" Buko, "See how you feel when you throw overboard your cherished self, known as Toki Mune. I will see you again when you have done that." Toki Mune, "How can this be done?" Buko, "Shut out all your thoughts." Toki Mune, "How can my thoughts be shut out of consciousness?" Buko, "Sit cross-legged in meditation and see into the source of all your thoughts, which you imagine as belonging to Toki Mune." Toki Mune, "I have so much of worldly affairs to look after, and it is difficult to find spare moments for meditation." Buko, "Whatever worldly affairs you are engaged in, take them up as occasions for your inner reflection, and someday you will find out who this beloved Toki Mune of yours is."